This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, I'm Hugh Wooldridge, fellow Chiswick person. I direct plays for a living and I produce plays for a living.
I'm Nick Hutson, and we are here at the lovely basement level of the High Road House, which is a sort of private members club in Chiswick. Hugh, thank you very much for joining me on Musical Talk. I've been brought to your attention a lot by friends of other Chiswick people we know, like Mike Dixon and Rosemary Ash and Jonathan Cohen. And it's every time, because we live on the same road, funny enough.
Oh, really?
And every time, they come to see me, they say, you get Hugh Wooldridge on. So I've done that. Hugh, you are, from my research, one of the most prolific director of sort of musical concerts in the country, but you're also a huge supporter of new writing as well, which is very important. You're a lighting designer, you're a writer, you're a director, you're a producer, and set design.
Which, funny enough, in America, that's kind of considered a great thing. In this country, it's rather frowned on. It's changing. If you did more than one thing, it used to be jack of all trades, master of none. Whereas in America, they sort of celebrate the fact that somebody can do more than one thing. And also, what people forget is that when you're employed to do something like lighting, you're not being employed as a director, you're being employed as a lighting designer. And so, therefore, you keep your mouth shut so as not to interfere with what the director is doing. You're there to support other people rather than sort of ride in and interfere with their production.
Especially in the world of musical theatre, where it's all so collaborative.
It is a collaborative art form, and one of the things I do when I look at people's CVs is I look to see people who've been employed more than once by an organisation or by a director or whatever. Anybody can do a production at the National or the RSC. That's always impressive, but it's far more impressive to look at somebody who has worked on 12 productions at the Mercury in Colchester, certainly with an event which comes back year after year after year, like the Night of a Thousand Voices. We are a very happy band of people. We've worked together, we know each other, we know how we work. And it is a fairly massive undertaking, and therefore it's good to have a group of people who like each other and get on with each other and are able to do good work with each other. Funnily enough, I worked with a wonderful choreographer in America called Michael Lichtfeld, who did Little Women on Broadway, and we were doing a big celebration of the Benedum Center, CLO, Civic Light Opera in Pittsburgh, and it was the Richard Rogers Award, and it was the first time we worked with each other. We got on with each other terribly well. I did a staged version of Sunrise Sunset, and there was a young ballet dancer. I put some ballet dancers into it, a couple of ballet dancers. She was wearing a scarf, or she wasn't wearing a scarf, one of the two, I can't remember. And I remember saying to the girl, who was then, I think, 16, she's now one of the leading people in Chicago, she's been the dance captain of Chicago on Broadway for the last 10 years or whatever. But I said to her, put a scarf on, or I said to her, take the scarf off. But I said, but whatever you do, tell the choreographer, because one knows that people don't like shocks. And so we did the dress rehearsal, but being 15 or whatever, she didn't really know what I was talking about and didn't tell the choreographer. And Michael Lichtfeld came up to me and screamed at me in front of everyone, "You've destroyed my number, how dare you, how dare you?" And I said, quite quietly, "Michael, do you want the scarf on or scarf off? What is the problem?" But you know what it's like when tensions are coming up to pre-production. And I can't remember whether she had it on or she had it off. I can't remember a thing about it, but I do remember Michael not being a very happy bunny. I did my next show, which was a Sondheim Salute on Broadway, and I asked for Michael to be my choreographer. And he said, "Hugh, I'm astounded." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I behaved so badly in Pittsburgh." And I said, "Well, that's why you're working." Because you knew you behaved like a major four-letter word. I knew you behaved like a major four-letter word.
Let's move on.
But you're a wonderful choreographer. So I knew his worst, he knew my worst, and we, work with each other whenever we can.
You're most famous, arguably, for the Night of a Thousand Voices, which you've been doing for
15 years, coming up to 15 years, yeah.
Also for Chessing Concert,
Yeah.
a very recent
Yeah.
ish event. 3 different versions of An Evening with Alan J. Lerner. I wanted to
Yeah.
concentrate on that because the people you worked with in that are just, the
It was extraordinary.
top of the top of the top.
Yes, yes. Again, there's a reason for this. As I'm sure other people will have mentioned, Noel Coward changed his career every 10 years. He started off as the boy actor, then he became a writer, then he became a director, then he couldn't be employed, so he became a cabaret artist in Las Vegas. Then he went back to being a director, and he ended up by being an actor in The Italian Job. So every 10 years he reinvented himself, and I can understand why. My
Like
own
Madonna, really.
Well, I can see many similarities, but in my own career, such as it is, about 20 years ago, maybe less, real estate became producers, and the wonderful hands-on producer like Michael Codron, Harold Fielding, people who actually cared about the productions and who were in them, and people who would tailor-make a production, particularly, as you say, musical theatre being a collaborative art form. They were superseded by people who owned theatres.
Well, that's a problem, I think, on Broadway. Is you have
Absolutely.
49,000 producers who don't care for theatre.
Exactly, and because of that, there were probably at that time maybe 8 first-class directors, and they would include Trevor Nunn, Hal Prince, Mike Ockrent, Peter Hall, etc. If I was on a list, because of some of the galas I've done, I would probably be, say, in the top 20 somewhere, possibly. But at that time, they stopped going down lists because market forces dictated that they got the name who the building people knew who they were. In other words, whereas once I might be asked to direct a production in Leatherhead, which might then move to London, Peter Hall and Trevor Nunn were then directing at the Thorndike Leatherhead because they weren't working in other theatres. And also, if Peter Hall or Trevor Nunn weren't available, or Richard Eyre, weren't available for May 1999, they would say, well, we'll wait till do it in May 2000, not let's find another director. So which is a very long way of saying that I wasn't going to wait to go up the list. I wanted to try and make my way
Up the list
doing
yourself.
something which nobody else was doing. And so I tended to specialise in doing these fly-by-a-seat, relying on the charity of others' productions. And do you know what? If you'd said to me 25 years ago that you're going to spend your life raising money for other people, I would have laughed, because I always saw myself as a commercial director, hopefully raising money for other people, but more for producers than for charitable causes. But because so many of the events that I do involve so many people who, if you were to put a commercial value on them, you wouldn't be able to afford to do them. They do tend to be events that raise money for other people, which is great, and I'm really happy about it. And as you say, you get to meet the most wonderful people.
Well, just looking at the list here, we have Julie Andrews, Liza Minnelli, Robert Goulet, sat in along with us, Sally Ann Howes, Rudolf Nureyev, Leonard Bernstein, Len Cariou, and that's in one concert.
Oh yeah, that was a fairly extraordinary concert.
How did you do a rehearsal room on that first day?
It's very good. It was very, very good. I mean, with all these big concerts, the first thing I do is I get the big name and then say, would you like to work with? So in that case, it was Julie. And I got Julie Andrews, and I said...
When was this, roughly?
That was 1989. Julie came on board because she adored Alan J. Lerner, which I knew. And she said, of course I'll do it. And found a date, booked the Lincoln Center, New York State Theatre. And then it was just a question of ringing round people... together with Liz Robertson, Alan's widow. Would you like to come on board? Would you like to come on board? Would you like to sing with Julie Andrews? Everything that Alan wrote about her in his book, On the Street Where You Live, was true. She was quite simply the nicest woman and the most professional woman to work with.
Probably still is, isn't it?
Absolutely. She's adorable. what was so interesting, Robert Goulet, of course, was her Lancelot. Robert Goulet at that time was right at the top of his tree as a cabaret singer, concert artist, as well as occasionally going out playing Arthur in Camelot. He would normally probably have a band call where the first 45 minutes of the band call would be, particularly in New York, would be saying hi to the musicians, to Ray on drums and so and so and so and so, Leanne on violin, Teresa on flute. And you would spend the first 45 minutes, how's it all going, talking about the children, and then he'd probably sing for about 20 minutes in a sound check. So the whole sound check for an artist like Robert Goulet would probably be an hour to an hour and a half. He had 3 minutes. He saw that Julie Andrews, who was doing the last 25 minutes of that show, had 26 minutes rehearsal. He was as happy as a sandboy. And they all were, because they saw that Julie was happy, they weren't going to make a complaint. I did do something quite wise. Leonard Bernstein was doing the number from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which Alan wrote with Leonard Bernstein. And he was singing with June Anderson, who he was very fond of, the soprano. I think our band call finished at 6, so I called him at 10 to 6, because I knew that he, of all people, would know that you cannot, particularly on a Monday night, go in an opera house. You can't go over time. And so he knew the call was finishing at 6, and he literally came onto the podium, and I knew he had time to go through the number twice, and that was it. Off we went with the rehearsal, and he said, stop, stop, stop. And he went up to Don Pippin, who was conducting, in front of all the orchestra, and said, it goes like this. And they took him by the hand. He took him by the hand, and he just gave the beat for the thing. And Don said it was probably the most important moment of his career. Everybody would have thought, how dare he embarrass her? And he said, no, 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 no. With anybody else, but not with Leonard Bernstein. And we got in just literally, I think we were 10 seconds over, and we got through the whole thing. I mean, when somebody like Leonard Bernstein says he's going to play a Negro slave boy, because he did the number with June Anderson, take care of this house, and he goes, yes, Musing, and you think, well, that's going to be kind of strange, but you don't say no. And he was wonderful. It was an extraordinary evening.
At this day of recording, the wonderful Arts Ed, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit, their new theatre is sort of up and running now, and Andrew Lloyd Webber is at this very moment round the corner giving a talk to the new students and the graduating students. It says here the first 21 years of Sydmonton Festival. Tell me about that, Hugh.
I met Andrew in 1976. I was about 4 years old, and I was Eric Thompson's assistant on Jeeves, the first Jeeves, and it was a cataclysmic disaster. The conductor was Anthony Bowles, who had been my director of music at Lambda. Eric Thompson had directed Journey's End. Having been an actor, he turned to directing, directed a wonderful production of Journey's End, and then had directed all the Eightborns, and so was known to be a wonderful comic director. Bob Swash was the general manager and co-producer for Robert Stigwood, and Tommy Elliott was the production manager, who had been attached to a lot of theatre projects, successful shows like Fiddler on the Roof. So we had a dream team. The music was by Andrew Lloyd Webber, the story by P.G. Wodehouse, and the book was by Alan Ayckbourn. And the first reading was one of the most extraordinary days of my life. Alan read his own stage directions, which were hysterically funny. Andrew played the piano and did a lot of the underscore, and the company, I think Paul Maguire was the rehearsal pianist, he may have played some of the music, and the company,
stuff.
Yeah, exactly, David Hemmings, Michael Aldridge, John Turner, Betty Marston, they performed their songs, and it was no question of people sort of saying, well, I haven't looked at it yet. They performed their songs, And it was an extraordinary occasion. So we all sat round thinking this is just the most exciting thing. We were like being in a musical ourselves. It was an extraordinary moment where a group of actors and stage managers and writers and collaborators, we all thought this is absolutely fantastic. And then we actually started the reading. And the reading lasted 5 hours. Now, it lasted 5 hours because we were laughing so much and the stage directions. But that was the cause for the show being wrong. Mm-hmm. It should never have gone into rehearsal. It should have been edited, it should have been cut. When we got down to Bristol, I remember walking on the stage with Eric and Tommy Elliott coming up and saying, looking into the grid, saying, we can't bring that truck in because it's banging all the other bars. Eric looked up and said, well, just cut it. Now, that piece of scenery, by today's money, probably cost £22,000. And the idea was that Jeeves was going to close Act 1 by opening the back of the set, and we would see a lorry full of the scenery for Act 2. That was going to be the applause moment. Jeeves has produced a set out of nowhere.
The chandelier and
everything. It was going to come out of the back of that lorry. That lorry never ever landed on the stage. And that was the problem with that show. It was just not planned. Nobody had absolutely worked it out to the nth degree.
It's funny because it almost sounds like a Jeeves and Wooster plot in a way, you know, this whole art imitating life, imitating art kind of thing going on.
It was extraordinary because Andrew, I don't think either Andrew or Alan will mind me saying, they weren't talking to each other. I mean, they were absolutely at each other's throats. And so they just talked to me. So Andrew would say, tell that man, da-da-da-da-da. And Alan would say, tell that person, da-da-da-da-da.
It's a bit childish, isn't it?
And it was extraordinary. I mean, it was an extremely unhappy time. For me, I just was completely wide-eyed and goggle-eyed. When it got to London, Betty Marston, who I'm sad to say her husband died during the rehearsals in Bristol, she was called into the producer's office and said, the writers have written out your part. So she was completely written out, one strain of the entire strain. As you know, when you cut shows, you don't cut 2 lines or 2 words here and there. You have to go for whole pages. Whole scenes, or reorder the whole thing. And it was so badly handled. So we arrived very demoralised that one of the company had been fired. We arrived in London, and about 12 days in London, maybe less, I was called up to the producer's office where Eric was, and I was told that Eric had been removed from the production and that Alan Ayckbourn was going to take over as director, but would only do so if I stayed. So I had, again, as a really young person, I had to go to my boss and say, what do you want me to do? Because my loyalty was with the person who employed me rather than the production. And Eric said, are you mad? I want to know what's going on. Of course you're staying.
In a way, it proved that Andrew had trust in you, which is why it led to a close working relationship.
Yes, well, that's exactly, I mean, the nicest thing of all that happened out of Jeeves, I mean, nice is a terrible word to use, but we'll use it for the time being. Andrew had a supper party for 12 people about 2 weeks after Jeeves closed. And he made a vow to all of us there, I will never let this happen again. And it's funny that Anthony Bowles actually probably knew more about musicals than anybody else in the room, because Alan had never done one before, Eric had never done one before, Andrew had been connected with them but had never done one before. He'd never produced one at that time. Christopher Bruce had not done a musical before. Wojtek, I don't think, had ever done a musical before, Wojtek being the designer, who was known by Alan as the Polish rear gunner. In fact, the room we're sitting in now looks very like the set, except if this was green, this panelling was green. It was a strange set, as opposed to going to somebody like Julia Trevelyan-Oman doing a real...
Well, you'd expect an English country home.
Exactly.
Toad Hall or something like that.
Exactly. It was a strange time, but as Andrew said, the one thing that came out of it was our friendship. And for the next 21 years or so, I helped him with his Symington Festival, and we did concerts, lots of new artists, plays, readings, wine tasting, mushroom tasting, cheese tasting, anything tasting that was going. And it was a great time. And I suppose that led, in the end, to me being asked by Andrew to direct the music of Andrew Lloyd Webber. I'd already started doing my big concert things, and so it wasn't such a crazy leap. So we did that, funny enough, also in 1989. And last year, in the University of Oklahoma, we did the 21st anniversary production. So I've completely revised it and brought it up to date.
What's your view on the upcoming Andrew Lloyd Webber project?
It's quite an interesting subject. My mum was an actress and was very close to Valerie Hobson. And Valerie Hobson was married to Jack Profumo, John Profumo, MP. I remember as a child waking up one morning, looking outside, and on the lawn outside where we lived, there were about 20 cars. And I said, what's going on? And we didn't know what was going on. And then we heard the news of what had happened in Parliament. Everybody assumed that Jack Profumo and Valerie Hobson would come and live with us to escape until all the furore died down. I have a friend, Barry Savory, who is an osteopath. He told me how old he was the other day, and I couldn't believe it, because he looks a good 20 years younger than he is. But he is what one might call a society osteopath. His clients range from the monarchy down to serfs, me being a serf. And people don't know whether Stephen Ward was a scapegoat. They don't know the true story. When somebody commits suicide, you actually don't know what happens, what made them commit suicide, whether he was pressured to commit suicide or whatever. We just don't know.
Do you think he's going back to his kind of Evita-style storytelling?
I've heard bits and pieces, but I have with Andrew, I either want to be there right from day one,
or there opening night,
on first preview. I try not to do the same. If I'm going to be of any use to a friend, if I go through the rehearsal period and watch it, and are making suggestions and remarks throughout, that's no help to anybody. It's a bit like the story of Cameron, I'm led to believe, turned up at a rehearsal in a tracksuit once to do the warm-up with the actors. Well, that's not going to help. You know, a producer is someone...
I just want to pause for that whilst we imagine Cameron McIntosh in a tracksuit.
If indeed it was true. But if you're going to help as a producer, or you're a director who's been invited in to help a production which is in trouble, you're absolutely no good whatsoever if you're watching how it's grown. It's far better to keep away and then make your comments. It's funny, always written Andrew reports of his shows. You know, if there's been someone who's good, if there's been someone who's not so good or whatever. This was during the Symington era. And I went to see Whistle Down the Wind in Washington, and quite honestly, it wasn't very good. And I didn't write anything to Andrew. And I got a message, Wooldridge, you were viewed in Washington, report please. And then you have to say what's wrong with the show. I mean, it is no good, as a lot of your listeners know, going round to see a friend in a play who's in a play which isn't very good, or if they're not very good, saying, oh, it's marvellous, it's one. People know. Now, you don't go up to someone when they're glistening with sweat from
opening night
or whatever, and say, Jesus, that was crap. You find your moment. But I think that as a director, you have to be honest. If you get the reputation of saying, oh, it's marvellous, it's wonderful, it's marvellous, and people know it isn't, your company's not going to thank you.
What do you think was the problem with Love Never Dies?
Very easy. And actually, I did write 12 pages on that one after seeing the first act down at Symington. What I actually believe is that there has to be a reason to write a show. Just because it's there is not a good enough reason. Phantom of the Opera is one of the great shows, one of the greatest musical theatre shows ever. It is enormously popular. I did the very first production of the songs down at Sivington with Colm Wilkinson, and even at that time, right in the very, very early days, when in fact I lit Colm only from one side rather than putting a mask on so that his face was in shadow, one knew that this was going to be something very special. I remember saying to Hal, who I'd met on Evita, I remember saying to Hal, "It will never work, Hal, it's not frightening enough." Well, I was wrong. I said, if you've got the Phantom in the title, it must be frightening. And I said, you need to make it more frightening. Well, I got it wrong, and he got it right. But Phantom is a great show, and it will be revived in 200 years' time, and it will be successful whenever it's done. So to come up...
If it ever closes, of course.
If it ever closes. If it comes... if there's another production of it, whether you call it Phantom 2 or Love Never Dies or whatever, unless it is better than the first one, there's no point. And if you've written the best, it is of its genre. It's very difficult to do something better. So I wrote that to the composer, and I also wrote, there is a way that you could make it more interesting for an audience, and that is to answer some of the questions from Phantom of the Opera. For example, why does Raoul want the masquerade monkey in the auction at the beginning of the play? It's never addressed. He is never on stage with the masquerade, as far as I can remember. So that was something that you could answer in Love Never Dies. If we establish that the Phantom is a wonderful master magician, who makes his tricks? In other words, he's going to go to Coney Island, which is all about magic and circus. There will be people who make tricks there. So why don't you get the name of the flyman who kills himself, or is found hung in Phantom, to be the master magician, and in fact he's not dead at all. In other words, there are things in Love Never Dies which say, oh God, I must go back to see Phantom of the Opera.
And vice versa.
And vice versa. That is the reason. The most important thing, though, is that you have got to absolutely be faithful to your audience. You've got to be faithful to the fans of Phantom. You can't slap them in the face and say, this is another show, it stands by itself, take it or leave it. I urged Andrew to ask Anthony Hopkins to play the Phantom with Sierra Boggess, because then you have the Pygmalion of the younger woman with the older man. The relationship with Ramin, who I'm a great admirer of, was potty, completely and utterly potty. That he's gone younger, she gets older, he goes younger, and Love Never Dies has got some of Andrew's best music in it. It's a fabulous score.
It's interesting. I saw Love Never Dies 5 times,
right,
and I've seen Phantom once.
Right.
That's
interesting.
The music appealed to me a lot because it went into burlesque and jazz and all that. It was more pop, not poppy in a way, but it was. And everyone knows Phantom so much. You kind of.
The thing that you must remember is that when Phantom was written, nobody knew what Phantom was, and Andrew was very, very keen for people not to know that it was an amplified score. And in fact, Martin Levan took the cones of the speakers out of their cabinets and concealed them amongst a set. And the speakers, the effect speakers at the back, were pointed towards the wall. They weren't pointed towards the audience. And the microphones were concealed. He really wanted, and Hal really wanted, to make people think this is a Victorian opera we're watching. And the orchestration, one of David Cullen's magical orchestrations, was again for real. You would not know that there was a synthesizer playing. You would not know that there were tracks playing which were made in a recording studio. Cut 25 years later, when it's done in Las Vegas, it was completely redesigned. Mick Potter redesigned the sound, and it was 5.1 stereo sound. In other words, it was written for electronic amplification.
The next question I have, does Andrew get back to you with kind of rebuffs from your criticisms, or does he just politely read them? And
That is a matter
between you and your email.
Me and God. How dare you talk about Andrew like God?
But it's lovely that you're able to have that continual working relationship.
I think it's really important. I mean, I obviously don't see Andrew as much as I used to, because, I mean, I saw him an awful lot. But he has got his family, who are all growing up, and so, you know, he's got his new coterie of supporters. When I said to him I wanted to do the new music of Andrew Lloyd Webber, he was very supportive of that. And we're both big fans of Jessie Buckley. And I wanted to do something with Jessie, with Andrew's music, and he was very supportive of that. So, I mean, you know, you can't spend 21 years working on projects together for a door supple. I suppose you kind of have a big row, but I don't really believe in rows.
So what's coming up for you, Hugh?
Well, as a jobbing director, you're a whore. You go
not the term I'd use, but if you want to use it, feel free.
You go where you're asked, as you say.
Where money is.
Well, anybody throws money at you, you're there. I'm very lucky. I love what I do. For me, I get as much of a thrill working with the university students in America or in Denmark or at Arts Ed as I do in working with Julie Andrews and Leonard Bernstein, who we were talking about earlier. I do spend time working abroad, working with young people. We were talking, you may have heard Anna coming in a second ago, my assistant. We were talking at lunchtime about some of the projects we're working on. I'm doing a dance drama in Italy, which is going to New York City Centre this year, setting up 1,000 Voices again. But we've got 3 scripts which are waiting to go into production, which are new plays. There's one very big project which, boringly enough, I can't talk because the ink isn't dry, but I would like to say you'll be among the very first to know.
Oh, thank you. Well, Hugh, thank you very much for appearing on Musical Talk for your first time, and hopefully there'll be
as you're a neighbour.
We are, yes. We'll make you a co-presenter.
Come banging on the door.
But Hugh Wooldridge, thank you very, very much for talking
to
us this afternoon.
Nice to speak to you. We're now shaking hands.
Yeah. This episode of Musical Talk is copyright 2013.